Okay. All right. Erev Tov. Good evening, everybody. Um, Firstly, thank everybody for coming out on what is the equivalent. I always remember in America this time of year, I always had to thank people to come to an evening shir because it really was cold. Minus, usually in the minus 10s to 12 degree range, Fahrenheit that is. But certainly this weather is a little bit challenging, so I am very appreciative that people have come to hear, continue listening to my deliberations here. Before we begin, I think we really do have to mention today's Levaya, Mr. Lipschitz. I know there is a British connection there because his daughter, I think, was living in London. Sharon Lipschitz, I think her name is. So may his memory be for a blessing. And obviously tomorrow we're thinking about Mishpacha Bibas, and there's no words. I'm not even going to say anything because we all know what we're thinking, but I can't really say more than that. But again, may their memories be for a blessing. All right, we are hopefully getting to the end of Perek Aleph. Good evening. Hi, Erev Tov. And good evening. We last time, if you remember, and I'm interested to hear that there was a bit of reaction to this. The attempt to try and understand, on the one hand, how Penina could remain the tzaddikus, as the rabbis call her, and at the same time, the way she behaved, which seemingly was, I'm going to use the word abusive because that's the only word I can think of, towards Chana. So, we tried to sort of suggest a situation, and again, with rabbinic background and all the rest of it, I'm going to leave it at that. But we will sort of slightly mention it at the beginning of Perek Bet as well, but I'm not going to go into it in detail. This evening's diet is also something that I'm assuming might give you a little bit of indigestion. Certainly certain members of the panel, as they say, I like that Hebrew word panel. What's the Hebrew for panel? Panel. Panel. So, I always learn a new Hebrew word when I watch the news here. And we're going to get to the point where Shmuel comes into being, he's born, and we get a story when he is very, very young. I just want to preempt it with a story that happened. My wife will correct me if I get this wrong, that my daughter, who's now principal of school in Baltimore, before that, she lives in Silver Spring, Maryland. And one day there's a knock on the door, the year 2020, I think it was. And a young boy comes in, 6 years old, together with 2 Secret Service guys, like really heavy dudes. And first grade, it's the first grade. And this young boy comes in, and lo and behold, none other than, with the surname Kushner, Jared and Ivanka's son. Now, what happened was they'd been in the school in Washington, D.C., and because they'd gone to White House events without masks, the parents went berserk, and the head had to ask the parents. Must have been very difficult for him to leave the school, and they ended up in my daughter's school in Silver Spring, Maryland. Why I tell you this story is because this 6-year-old Joseph Kushner, who now is 10 or 11 years old, you've seen pictures of him recently at the inauguration, if you saw those photos. One day they had a program in school. This was just before the 2020 election. So my daughter wanted to get a feeling. She taught them a bit about the Constitution and whatever was going on. And she said to the kids, write down 3 sentences what you think the President of the United States does for America. And she's got the grandson of Donald Trump sitting in the room. It should be a no-brainer. It turned out to be a very interesting exercise because the young man sat there and did nothing. He didn't want to write down anything. I think he might have been told maybe, you don't spill the beans. He's 6 years old. He seems to be, at that time, was very aware of who he was. Eventually, he does write down 3 things. First thing he wrote down is, my grandfather drinks Coca-Cola all day. We know that's Donald Trump's secret weapon, and he probably still does it. The second thing he wrote down, which equally is interesting, is that he wrote down saying, my grandfather eats chocolate all day. He has a special supply, apparently. And then the third thing he wrote down, which was really sad because my daughter was getting a bit frustrated, tell me what your grandfather really does, Grandpa Don, as she called him. And the young man said, "Oh, my grandfather uses bad language all day," and that was it. Once he said that, that was the end of the discussion. Why I'm telling you this story? They were out of the school pretty quick because obviously the 2020 election did not go in his direction, and the family upped and left and are now living in Florida. And I have to say, to her credit, she converted. She converted Orthodox. For those of you who do not know, Haskell Luxstein of KJ in New York was in charge of her conversion. And I have to say that when she talks Jewish, she really talks Jewish. She gave a whole thing about Lashon Hara a few months ago. Very, very interesting, and kol hakavod to her. So the idea of a precocious 6-year-old, that's really why I'm telling this story. Sometimes if you're teaching first grade, or even here they're called Trom Chava, even a bit younger, sometimes you'll have that one kid in the room that this is either the troublemaker or the peacemaker or whatever. There's going to be one kid that's going to stand up. It could be a boy or girl, that doesn't matter. And that's a reality, I think, in teaching, particularly when you're teaching the younger grades. And we're going to get a very precocious young man who is being taken by his parents to the Mishkan, right? Remember the whole story. Was it a promise that he would go to the Mishkan, or was it a promise to bring food? And halavai, he should be ra'oi to go to the Mishkan. You know what we said last time, I don't want to go back over that. But the reality of it is that she now fulfills her vow. Chana brings, good evening, Erev Tov. Chana is bringing Shmuel to the Mishkan. And there is a story here which, again, is midrashic in nature, I have to say, but is totally, it's so beyond, above and beyond, that I just can't ignore it. Even though I have to say that the Radak, when he talks about this story, he uses the word rachok. Now, rachok normally means far away, but I think in this case, it's the word I would rather use in English, far-fetched. Right? Norman Lamb once said that Yiddish has sprung into English, and you get fakrumt and for this, and he said, and there's a word far-fetched, and that's the word he used. I thought that was wonderful. Norman Lamb had a very wonderful sense of humor. The Zichron Livracha, the former chancellor of YU, far-fetched. Think about that. So the story is the following, and we're on chapter 1, and as I said, I hope we'll get to the end of the parak, and we've just seen the birth of Shmuel. And in fact, what we'll do from verse 20, after a period of time, a big simcha, after 20 years, she's davening, and she has a son, Shmuel, Now, interesting, though Shmuel seems to be from Lashon Shema, to listen, right? Shema El, God heard my prayer, but the posuk itself says it's she'iltiv, it's based on the word she'elah, meaning to borrow, lish'ol, to borrow. And obviously, there is a very intrinsic connection between Shmuel and the future king of Israel, who's going to be called Shaul, borrowed, right? And the name is not without significance, and I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to talk about it now, but there is a very spiritual connection, as well as obviously Shmuel is the one who anoints Shaul, but there's a spiritual connection between Shmuel and Shaul, which will become very intense as the story develops. We'll get there eventually. But listen to this. Kafala. Again, Ish meaning important person, VIP. And he's going, this man Elkanah, with his whole household, like we explained at the beginning, taking everybody with him. Lizbach Lashem et Zevach Hayamim et Nidro, and he's coming to fulfill his vow and bring his donation and the whole works. And he's coming to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle. And v'Chana lo alta. At this point, Chana stays home. Ki amra li'isha, because she said to her husband, I'll bring the child when he is weaned. Now, weaning is what we would say feeding or whatever, and in those days they would feed. Certainly, breastfeeding was done a lot to children a lot older than it is today. So the question is, how old is Shmuel in this story that we're going to read? I would like to think he's around 4 or 5 years old. Some say he's a bit younger, but if he's a bit younger, then the midrash really falls down. I think if you're talking about a precocious, like Trom Chava kid, something like that, I think we may be able to hold on to the story as much as we can. We're going to get there in a minute. But listen to this. So they're coming to appear before God, and that's where he's going to stay. In other words, Chana says, to quote the Hebrew, she goes like this with her fingers and says, no, wait, it'll happen soon. You go to the Mishkan, do your thing as you have been doing, bringing the people there, and Chana's going to wait. Elkanah said, Asiyato beinak. He's always, he's trying to be nice. He's Mr. Nice Guy. Okay, even though we said that he really didn't understand her pain. We had a comment like that at the beginning, but at this point, he's trying to, smooth it over. Shavi ad gomlech, he says, you stay home, ach yokem Hashem et dvaro, but may God fulfill his word. And there's a whole discussion over here in Rashi, what exactly that means, that God's fulfilling his word. And again, it's sort of, I don't want to go into this in too much detail. He says here, Midrash Haggadah says, Nehemiah says, Rabbi Shmuel, a divine voice would resound throughout the world. All right, if you like sort of hyperboles, this is a great one, that there's a voice going round the world every day saying a righteous man is destined to arise, his name will be Shmuel. You switched on the BBC and you heard Shmuel is coming, right? And that's essentially what the rabbis are saying here. So V'yokein Dvaro, the word of God was fulfilled around the world. The name of Shmuel basically was going to become a big name. I think that's the way I read it, and that's what Chana is saying. Now listen to this, 24. So now she's actually going to bring him, finally. And what does she bring with? Parim shlosha, 3 bulls, ve'ifa achad, kemach, and a measure of flour. These are all, heavy stuff. You need a couple of donkeys to schlep all this stuff. V'nevel yain, a big container of wine. V'tvi'eu beit Hashem Shiloh, all brought to the house of God in Shiloh, which seems to fulfill her vow, as we explained a few weeks ago. V'hana'ar no'ar, the interesting expression. The lad is a lad. So strange double expression. Of course he's a lad, he's a young boy. So the rabbis say the word na'ar is not like in Yiddish. You talk about a na'ar in Yiddish means a slightly, a person who, is a bit of a fool. As a famous chazan once told me, chazonim na'aronim, he said. Chazonim na'aronim means chazonim are known as fools. Why? He told me that? I do not know. He was a very smart guy, but he always tried to explain to me the Eastern European tradition. So, interesting man. What I think, I read the word na as astute. This is a young kid who is really, he's got a good Rebbe. He's already started learning from a young age. And it's a sort of, when you read the article book about whatever rabbi it is who was at the age of 3, already knew it all, or at least knew on his way to knowing it all. This is the sort of character we're talking about here. Not everyday sort of kid, but a special kid. Now listen to this verse, 25. Vayishchatu et apar. They're going to do a shchita. They're going to slaughter the animal. They're going to the temple. It says they slaughtered the animal, and it's all in one verse. Vayaviu et anar el Eli, and they brought the lad to Eli. Almost as if with the vav connect over here, the word an, as if slaughtering the animal and bringing the boy to Eli seem to be connected. And the rabbis are very mystified. Why would you say that this is one event leading to the next? Slaughtering the animal is what you do to the animal. Bringing the child to Eli is what you do. You bring him to the Rebbe to get a bracha or whatever it is. But there seems to be a connection here. And everyone is mystified. I'm going to read the psukim to the end of the chapter, then I'll hit you with this midrash because it is unbelievable. Pasuk Kavav Atoma, and at this point, Chana seems to go into I don't know what the word you can describe. She goes into panic mode. But Atoma Biadoni, she says to Alien, there's obviously something happening in the background. We're not really informed about, certainly not in the text, where she says, "Oh my master, by your life, I was the woman, you remember the one that was standing and swaying, and you thought I was drunk until you realized that I wasn't drunk, and litpalel Hashem, and I davened to God." Good evening, hi there. Elanar zed palalti, and this is the child that I davened for. Vayitain Hashem li et sheilati, God answered my request, asher sha'alti me'imo, which I asked, which I requested, v'gam anochi shaltiu l'Hashem, and I am now lending him to God. Interesting, back to the she'elah, the word that we had before. Kol hayamim asher yasha'u l'Hashem, v'yishtachu sham l'Hashem, he's lent over to God, and he will bow down there to the Lord. Very strange conversation that she's had. It's almost, firstly, it's a one-sided conversation. Eli doesn't seem to say anything. And more to the point, what is she talking about? Right? It's almost as if she's standing there. The language of Bi Adoni, She's almost like she's begging. What is she begging for? Right? She's made a promise, according to the regular interpretation, going to bring her son to the Beit Mikdash, to the Mishkan, and that's it. She's bringing him, and he's got that's the story. So all of a sudden, she seems to be having a meltdown over here. Oh, you can say she's having a meltdown because the son is leaving home, but there's something more that's going on here. There really is something strange. Now, before I tell you this story, and before we have story time, I just want to preface this with what the Radak says. Radak Reb David Kimchi, around the year 1150, very major personality, wrote a tremendous commentary on the Bible. And his comment about this story that I'm just about to tell you is that I can't bring this story because it's far-fetched. As I said before, I don't even want to mention it. All right? So he, being true to his sense of wanting to be realistic, he says that for him, this story was just, beyond the pale. However, because I'm a bit of a dafkanik, I want to read to you this story. And, just hold on to your seats. And if you're going to have a little bit of conniption, then I'll hope you'll survive. Listen to this story. It's truly unbelievable. It's on the handout that I sent out on the WhatsApp. If you check the WhatsApp before the shiur, there's usually something there. Again, you can print it out, keep it on your phone. You'll have it in front of you. I'll read it in Hebrew. It actually is from Midrash Shmuel. There's a whole Midrash text on Shmuel, which is nice to know. And it's also brought in the Gemara Brachot, I think 31a, 31b, somewhere around that Lamed Aleph. And listen to this story because it is truly mind-blowing. I'll read it in the Hebrew. Bar Shmuel. So remember, they're all coming to the Mishkan. They're coming to the tabernacle. And they're schlepping the animals and the cheese and the wine. And, it's a Jewish affair. There's a lot of food around. And what happened? Bar Shmuel, umatzana, omdim al korbanotei. He found everyone lined up. Right? Now, this doesn't sound like Israel of the 21st century because lining up is a big challenge even today. But in the temple, seemingly everybody lined up. Everybody was waiting their turn. But nothing was happening. They're standing there with the animals, and they're waiting for the animals to be slaughtered. And then you take the blood and you put it on the mizbeach, on the altar, and then you go home with your steak, for supper. It's wonderful, it's a whole system there. But nothing was happening. So listen to this. Omar lahem, Shmuel, who is a very astute sort of little kid, 4, 5, maybe 6 years old maximum, but he's turning around and says to everybody, what are you waiting for? As I said, you're giving him a lot of credibility here, Shmuel, but it could happen. A kid who's really focused, has a good Rebbe, he knows that the shechita can take place. So everybody standing there says to him, what are you talking about? Hari anu mamtinim the kohen shiavo. We can't do this. We need the priest. I can't become the doctor if I'm going to see the doctor. I've got to wait for the doctor to turn up. Dichtiv v'shachat et ben habakar lifnei Hashem, as the Torah said, you've got to slaughter the animal before God. Amar lahem. So Shmuel says to them, imdu v'shachatu, right? That you can do the shechita. Do we have a shochet in the house? Do we have a shochet? And the answer is, of course, I got a shochet. In those days, everybody had to do shechita one way or another. Certainly chickens, and there was always someone maybe to shech the bigger animals. And there is a shochet. And he says, lo kain taninam. And this is interesting. Shmuel makes an observation, which obviously he heard from his Rebbe. He's a young kid, but he's a smart kid. And he says, we've learned, shchita k'sheira b'zarim, b'nashim u'bavadim. Normally, people who are not allowed to slaughter animals in normal circumstance in the temple, and even outside the temple, but in this case, in a situation where it has to be done, it's a what we call b'diavad, second best situation. You can even use regular commoner gardener's shochet. It doesn't have to be a kohen. And Shmuel says, let's get on with it. At least we'll be ready when the kohen comes back from his lunch break. He'll be able to do the rest of the stuff, and everything will be fine. Now, third line of the handout. Kivan Sheba Eli. Eli turns up and he does not know what's going on because he's used to, manyanas takes a bit of time and everybody's hanging around and they're like a good schmooze. You can imagine everyone's waiting. And all of a sudden, the line is beginning to move, but there's no Kohanim to be seen. Eli is the only guy who's there, and he's an old man. He's in his 90s, according to tradition. You'll see why I say that, because the next story is already very old. He's even older than what he is here. And it says, Kivan sheba Eli v'nimtza shachtu. He found all these animals had been slaughtered. Amar lahem, mi yitzeh lachem et hashchita. Eli says, wait a minute, who allowed you to do this? You've done something here which, with all due respect, is to be questioned. Amru lo. So the people said, Narecha, that little kid over there, he told us we could do it. Unbelievable story. The fact that they listened to him, right? Why I like this story is that you see that even at that very young age, he has a certain presence, Shmuel. Very, very interesting. Even if you don't like the story. So he said, Eli said, Haviyu, bring him here. Bring her here. I want to talk to this kid. Chado dichtiv, and that's obviously now the verse. Vayishchatu et hapa, it says they slaughtered the animal. Vayaviu et anar Eli, and they brought the lad to Eli. Now you understand why the two items are connected. Because after the slaughtering, which the young boy had suggested that they do, Eli turns up and he says, bring him here. I need to talk to him. So listen to this. Bikesh le'onsha. Eli wants to punish him. Wow, what did Shmuel do wrong? And it seems that Eli considered this an absolute disrespect of the authority of Eli, even though it's a young kid. Remember, this is the biblical age. Today, this would not fly in any sense. But in those days, Eli feels there's an expression that is used in Pirkei Avot, Moreh halacha b'fnei Rabbo. He was giving a decision in front of the Rebbe. And if you do it in front of the Rav and you say, well, I think this, even though the Rav is standing there or will be coming in a few minutes, not allowed. And in fact, the Pirkei Avot says, mitchayev b'nafsho. Although you're not put to death in the earthly sense, you're certainly liable for a heavenly punishment. So this is serious, but he's a young kid. He's 6 years, maybe 5 or 6 years old. So this is Eli's suggestion. I have to punish him. And by punishing, maybe it could even be that he would daven that this kid will live no longer. It's shocking. Now listen to this. Bata Imo, Chana hears all of this going on, and that's why she goes into panic mode. Nishtadcha raglav, she literally falls flat on the ground. This is why she starts saying, Vatome bi Adoni, my master, Chei nafshecha Adoni, by your life. This is the child that you promised me. You gave me a bracha, and now you want to pray that he doesn't live? What sort of leader are you? Amar lo, he said to her, Amar lo, he said, Lo, Ana salit at kaim. In other words, basically what he's saying is that, did I not pray and this all came, in other words, through your prayers, I think it's actually where she said to him, didn't I daven and wasn't it fulfilled? So Amar lo, to which he replies, Eli, Yamot, this child deserves to die because he represents a challenge to my authority. V'ana matzlei v'yeti choran. I will daven that you'll have another child. That's not a great response, especially after waiting 20 years for this child. And the child is a very unique individual. He's already showing his personality. When one sees young children, there's certainly, as I said, sometimes you can tell there's a personality there which comes out, without referring to grandchildren and then all that kind of discussion, but I'm sure we've all got tales to tell. And it says, Amra, so what did she say? Elanar said, Palati, I daven over this child. You can't put a negative spin on this. So she says to him something very interesting. She says, Manda, this is Aramaic, but it's equivalent. Manda, lo didi v'lo didi. In other words, it's not up to you, Eli, to make this decision. I promised him to God. And if this child is going to be in a situation where he's not going to live anymore, it's up to the good Lord. And of course, in the eyes of God, everything was not quite as extreme. And all I can say is that now, with this pasuk and with this story, there are obviously a number of questions that we really have to think about. If we're going to take the Medrash seriously, the Radak is wonderful, because he says, Rachok, it's far-fetched, leave it alone. But I feel that there's a lot to learn here from Shmuel's behavior. Even as a young kid, he's showing that he has a presence. He's showing that, people standing around, and he said something where they listen, which I think is amazing, because normally a young kid, you give him a punch and that's it, you kick him out. And here, no, this kid obviously had a certain influence. But what we have to understand, what is totally above and beyond, number one is Ailey's reaction. For goodness sake, I mean, he's a young kid. With all due respect, every so often a teacher gets a little bit frustrated with the kids, but you don't, sort of get to the point where, what Ailey got to. And more to the point, you have to understand here, what is Ailey's machshava in the whole process? What was going on in the temple? And this is very, very interesting. And there's a lot of commentary on this. And one of the commentaries suggests that, in fact, the boys, Ailey's sons, not that they were out to lunch, they were there and they were just not engaged in what was going on. We know that they were not good people. We're told later on that they were actually money grabbers. What they did, you see in chapter 2, that everybody was bringing their meat. They used to make a real chulent over there, and of course they took the meat out of the pot to take it home to their families, the sons of Eli. They were not good guys. They were very, and the description of them is really not positive. Sons of Eli, and eventually the sons of Shmuel as well. Very interesting that, these great men, they did not necessarily, the next generation did not follow in the footsteps. So basically what's going on here is that the sons of Eli are treating this as if this is their kingdom, which it is, but they're abusing the system. They're saying to everybody, they're saying, we are in charge here, and you jolly, you say in English, you jolly well wait, right? You wait till I come back, and, and when if I come at 1 o'clock, if I come at 4 o'clock, come at 7 o'clock, you just got to wait. And it got to the point, and this is the real shocker. Those who've learned this will know, in chapter 2, I'm just going to refer to this, even though we'll come back to it. It says that the corruption was so bad. Eli heard about this, heard what was going on. And chapter 2, verse 22, Pasuk Chafber, Eli zaken ma'od. Eli was very old. V'shomad kol asher yasum banav l'chol Yisrael. He heard what his sons were getting up to. Ve'eit asher yishkevun et hanashim. There were women who were in the congregation, and yishkevun means literally to sleep with the women. They became corrupt to the point, and Rashi said, although there is a rabbinic interpretation which says that they kept them waiting overnight and therefore away from the husbands, because a lot of these women had just given birth, and by definition that in itself was the wrong thing to do, but Rashi initially says kamash ma'o, as it says, so it was, that they were taking advantage of the women who were standing there waiting to bring their sacrifices. These were really not nice guys. They were very corrupt, to put it bluntly. And their morals, everything about them was wrong. So Eli is faced with a dilemma, and this is what I find interesting, and why I'm sharing this with you. That Eli, and this is taken from a sefer I mentioned before, of Yitzhak Levi, who was a wonderful teacher in Chorev in Yerushalayim. My wife's cousin had him as a teacher. And he wrote this beautiful book, and unfortunately he died very young and didn't finish the book. But we have what he wrote on Shmuel, and he says that Eli had a problem. Eli knew that something was rotten in the state of the Mishkan. He knew that. But the problem was, how do you deal with it? Do you make an enormous complaint and throw the boys out? He wants to keep the kids connected. On the other hand, he knows that they are misbehaving in big time, right? To the point where they're taking advantage of the women there. It's terrible. So Eli is faced with a dilemma. What do I do? And Eli decided the best thing to do, keep them connected, keep them involved, make sure that they're there in the Mishkan. The fact that they are not doing the way it should be done, okay, at least they're there. At least it's better than them running around, in Tel Aviv in the nightclub or whatever the modern equivalent would be. And I understand that. I understand what Eli is saying. Along comes Shmuel, who's a young kid who doesn't have the how should we say, the seichel yet to understand, the nuance of the situation. He sees things like kids do, black and white. We know that to kids, it's all very, yes and no, right and wrong. And he sees a situation, as far as he's concerned, people are standing around and they're getting antsy and they're getting tired and whatever, and it's wrong. So Shmuel pipes up and says, Chavra, he says, what are you doing here? You're being very polite. You're not making a fuss, but it's wrong. You're standing here, and look, they're the Kohanim. They're sitting over there. They're watching the soccer match, and they're not getting involved in what they're supposed to be doing. So it's very interesting that Shmuel has got a point, but Eli has a retort. Eli's retort is, listen, the reality is Eli is the Gadol Hador. He's one of the great leaders of the generation. And he's taking Shmuel under his wing, as we know, to train him to become the next leader of the Jewish people. And Eli's attitude really is that if Shmuel is showing signs of rebellion at such a young age, by not accepting Eli's terms and conditions, etc., he's making a stand against Eli. This says Shmuel, as rather says Eli against Shmuel, this is unacceptable. I can't take this kid on. And Chana realizes that Eli is serious. And she starts begging not only for Eli to change his mind, but she realizes that Eli was so upset with the way that Shmuel had just done what he did. Eli took it to an extreme, and there's no question about it, and he saw it as a blatant act of rebellion, and an act of rebellion, Moreh halacha b'fnei Rabbo nitchai b'nafsho. He felt that this was something where Shmuel deserved a very serious punishment. And Chana begs for Shmuel's life, and she says to him, Rebbe, this is not right what you're saying. You can't be so strict like this. And what is so interesting, and why I feel happier just saying all of this, is because there's one rabbi, famous rabbi called Yecheskel Lander. Any of you who've been to Prague, you will know that famous Maharal, Rabbi Loeb, right? Very famous Maharal with the story of the Golem, which apparently did not ever happen, but everybody thinks it did, so it's a nice story. The only thing they do is they say Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbat twice on Friday night. And it's apparently to this very day in the Alt Neuschel. And the reason is because the first time they waiting for the Rebbe to turn up with the Golem, and it was getting late. So it got to the point where they couldn't wait anymore, so they said Mizmor Shir, and then he turns up with the Golem, switches him off, takes out the holy name or whatever, and they have to say the whole Mizmor again. So apparently in Prague to this very day, they say it twice. So that every Friday night. So that by definition means that obviously the Golem existed, because why else would they say the psalm twice? I mean, that's a obvious proof. But for those who like Sipuri Savta, I mean, it is one of those amazing stories, whatever you think of it. But later on, after the Maharal, there was a very famous rabbi known by his sefer, Noda B'Yehuda. Right? The Noda B'Yehuda, as my friend used to call him in England, Noddy B'Yehuda. I don't know why he did that, but those who know Noddy, you'll know what I'm talking about. For the Americans, I can't explain. So the Noda B'Yehuda says, I just want to understand one thing. If Eli was definitely, what's the word? He was coming along to say that Shmuel deserved the punishment. Shmuel's a young kid. You don't punish at that age. Right? There's a halachic issue. You can't issue a punishment like this. You can't pray for the demise of a young kid like that. So Noda B'Yehuda says, and he actually discusses this al pi halacha, which is truly amazing. And in the end, he says, you know what? Because he was such a smart kid, even though he's very young, he's considered as if he's an older. He's like they say about Rivka. The Rivka was 3 years old when she got married, but she was like a woman of 23. Right, if you go for that particular interpretation, which I would never been happy with, but whatever it is, the concept that even though they're young, they have the status of an older person. Fine, but the bottom line of this story, which is so interesting, is whatever you say, whether you go with the Radak and it's all far fetched, or whether you stay with the interpretation and you move along with it and try to understand what Chana is doing and what Eli is doing, and in the end of the day, what is Shmuel doing? For goodness' sake. You're a kid. Zip it. You're in adult company. But no, this is Shmuel HaNavi. This is the future leader of the Jewish people. So I guess maybe our expectation would be that he would say something. The reality of it is, this was what Reb Levi says. We've always got to be careful when we want to give tochacha. He says, very interesting. If you want to deliver rebuke, maybe the whole lesson, even if it's not for real, but the reality of the story which we've just studied it's a story in teaching us how to be careful when we want to rebuke. We want to say it's wrong. You stand up in shul, and the minhag is all of a sudden changes from what you're used to. When you come to Israel, there's a lot of change, a lot of differences there. And you get upset because you're used to the Misha Berach this way. And all of a sudden, the Gabbai does it in a different way. The answer is that every place demands a lot of common sense and practical application before you stand up there and start screaming your head off. And I think that's important, how to deliver rebuke. And obviously Shmuel, he's very young. He may be a smart kid, but he hasn't yet in any way developed that sense of awareness, how to say the right thing at the right time. And unfortunately, in this case, he said the wrong thing. May have been at the right time, but it was the wrong thing. So there is a limud. Even if you say this story is far-fetched, there is a kind of, sort of ethical teaching that comes out of it. So for that purpose, I was glad at least I could share it with you, even if you've sat through the last half an hour and reject everything that I've just said. I don't care. I don't care. I do care. Not that, it's one of those things. But as I said last time, I mean, to me, it's such an amazing story. Even if it never took place, and there's two sources to try and give us the makar of this, Midrash Shmuel, I think also in, as I said, Gemara Brachot, the reality of it is, even if it didn't happen, as they once said, I wish they would say that about me. In other words, even if it didn't happen, the fact that the rabbis felt that they could share such a story about Shmuel already gives us an inkling and insight into what this young kid, who eventually becomes such an amazing person, what he was really about. I just want to hear comments. Anybody not anybody squirming over here. I knew Rhonda was, but I just want to hear your comments. It's great. I mean, I know, but I couldn't. Can you understand why I couldn't resist?
I understand, but let me tell you that how I see it.
Yeah.
I see everything the total opposite.
Wonderful. That's the best.
Okay, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
First of all, we know that Eli was not a good father.
Yeah.
He was not a good parent.
Yeah.
He was a horrible father, and he allowed terrible things to go on in the Kohanim, especially with his sons.
Yeah.
So, and when Bnei Yisrael would bring their karbanot, the boys, both of them, violated and made them
correct,
unacceptable or irrelevant or
correct.
Whatever.
Correct.
And it says in the text, as you know, I'm a text person.
Yeah.
It says in the text, and I believe in chapter 2, that all of Bnei Yisrael was almost hesitant to come to Shiloh to make the karbanot.
It was so corrupt.
They were so corrupt.
Yeah.
That was part one. The second part was not only did they violate the karbanot, but they violated the women.
Correct.
And so, and when it's brought finally to Eli, and he knows what's going on, he brings the boys in, and he gives them a little, not even a patch, not even a rebuke. And so he can't even turn a bad situation around and say, okay, look, this is unacceptable. All of Bnei Israel is complaining.
Yeah.
So what happens is that not this midrash that we want to bring to our attention, I think, shows that Shmuel is not going to put up with the nonsense that's going on.
Okay.
And he's going to take matters into his own hands, because he does know a little bit more, and he has a father who teaches him.
Correct.
Because we know that his father does other things later on.
Yeah.
And that he gets his wisdom and his goodness from his father and mother. And he probably said, enough of this BS.
Yeah.
I'm going to take things in my own hands.
Yeah.
So and then when Eli comes and says, I'm going to really punish this kid like death, it shows exactly who Eli is. He has no business being the Kohen Gadol.
Yeah.
So consequently, while you're saying, here comes this venerated old man, is the Kohen and whatever, here comes this parent who can't handle his own children. Yeah. And so now he's going to tell someone else's child who is in the right what to do when he can't even he can't even punish
and to pray in such a absolutely. And
so it's a full.
It's a full. Certainly with Eli, absolutely. What I'm happy to put it out there that there is a difference about how to view Eli. But in terms of Shmuel and what he begins to represent, I think that in itself, putting Eli to one side, that is very interesting. Just this little kid, as I said, like the grandson of the president, he's a little bit more than your average kid. even at a very young age.
You can say that about a lot of kids in the Torah.
Yeah.
What about David? He shows his.
It's so interesting. David doesn't emerge for so many more years
I
than
understand, but
Shmuel.
he's a kid.
But in the end, he's young, but not as young as, again, according to different traditions, and we'll come to all of that. I want to put David to one side, but
no, but there are other young people who step up to the plate.
I just find that it's just so interesting that Shmuel's already showing that independence, not the tact that he needs to go with it. Because as a leader, you need a lot of seichel as well as ability to make a decision. That's a posek. What is a real posek? A real posek, someone who not only makes that halachic decision, understands the person's asking the question. All right.
You could also say, based on what you say, that because Eli couldn't control his own kids, he's like, okay, I'm going to do it on this kid.
Yeah, he's going to take it out on this kid.
Really give it to him.
Yeah,
because they're going to cower before my authority, because they're just the commoners.
Right.
So maybe that was.
Yeah, there's an element there. There's some interesting stuff here, and it's good to air it because.
Well, you know that also older, more senior people sometimes lose it more quickly with young people than.
I didn't know that.
He had no patience left. He had no co-op.
He couldn't have any patience. So interesting. Yes, question.
Eli was in charge of Shmuel's education.
Correct. He was the Rebbe.
I can't.
Right.
Yeah.
When he was with.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the great things about Shmuel is he didn't sit in one place. Maybe like Eli did. He went all around.
And I so appreciate that comment. Shmuel is what I so like about him. He really learns from his life experiences all the time, right? He learns about his father who went all around the country bringing people to the Mishkan. Even though now we see it wasn't so straightforward. People don't want to go because the whole place is corrupt. It's a pub over there. On the other hand, at the same time, he's also showing signs of independent thought as a young kid, right? I always love the report card, a 6-year-old. He thinks independently. Give me a break. You're 6 years old. But sometimes the teacher had nothing else to write, so you write a clever comment. Used to get these report cards in England always. My favorite was the kid who. What was the comment? It said that he sets himself low standards, which he constantly fails to achieve. That's a comment that a teacher put once, and I thought that was really. It made the parents sit back and think exactly what the shevach was at the time. It was really funny. That's one of my favorites. But whatever you say, Shmuel is, there's something about him which is very special. I'm going to say that. We can disagree on Eli, and I accept the comment, I accept the point, and Eli is really a challenging character. Again, if he's a shofet, that makes it even more complicated, because if he's the judge, wow, not only there's corruption at home, so what he was like in terms of running the bigger picture, we don't even know. We're not even told. So that's a big question. Yeah.
We have no shortage of public figures, public leaders, great public leaders who fail in parenthood.
Yeah.
Whether it's Eli, whether it's Shmuel himself, as we're going to see later on.
Correct.
Whether it's Moshe Rabbeinu.
Even Moses.
Okay,
Moses, correct.
Moshe Rabbeinu is
correct.
Although we can point to Yitzchak too as at least halfway.
Correct.
So there's no short. The problem is being in a position of leadership often means that you are taken out of the home to attend to the people you're leading.
Correct.
Clearly, with Moshe Rabbeinu, that's an issue.
And his whole life was eventually away from everybody. His whole tent was removed.
I mean, he is so far removed from everybody.
Correct.
Maybe he may be a great Rebbe and a great lawgiver, but he can't relate to his kids.
Correct.
Certainly.
Correct.
Well, it's like the doctor who delivers the babies. He says, I can deliver them, but I can't explain them.
Yeah.
So
and that's
sometimes it's not the parents; it's the circumstances and the kids.
Correct.
Nurture nature, and it is what it is.
Correct.
He was older when his kids were young.
Correct.
They weren't babies.
I'm gonna be a little bit close with it because we have literally 2 minutes left. And what I'm going to do is Tfilas Chana. We're not going to spend more than 2 minutes on it. And the reason why I'm doing that, you might be annoyed at me, but it's so beautiful and so poetic that to do it justice, we've got to really have like 3 or 4 sessions. And we can do a whole lesson. But I again, it's a different style. It gets into the poetry, which I want to get through the story. I want to get through the narrative here. And Tfilas Chana, but just want to say one word about it today. Maybe we'll come back to this next time. That it's an anomaly. Why? Because actually the Tefillah part is the last verse. There's 10 verses, 9 verses of praising God, and 1 verse where she actually davens, which is really strange, right? Because it's always known as Tfilas Chana. And I always set this as a kind of essay for students to write about Tfilas Chana. Why is Tfilas Chana not Tefillah? And they always looked at me strangely. Every certainly girls that came through the Jewish day school system or Beis Yaakov or wherever, Tfilas Chana is one of the things that they studied in great detail. And I tried to point out, I'm just going to show you very, very briefly. Just listen to the psukim, because at this point, maybe as a continuation of Chana imploring Eli, that's an interesting thought, she now comes and davens a special tefillah for the future of her son and essentially for the future of the Jewish people. Listen to what she says, and I'll read this very, very briefly. Titpalel Chana v'tomar, she davened, Olatz libi b'Hashem, my heart has been raised, rejoiced through God. Rama karni b'Hashem, and my horn is elevated through God. Very poetic. Rachav pi aloivai ki samachti b'shuatecha, I rejoice in your salvation. And again, this is not necessarily praying for anything. This is recognizing the Yeshua Hashem, the salvation of God. Now, it could be in terms of having a child, or it could be, as some of the rabbis say, a future prayer about the kingship, which Shmuel is going to be the instigator, that the king of Israel will in the future be successful. I'm just going to read the psukim. Ein kadosh kashem. Firstly, recognize the greatness of God. There's nothing holier than Hashem. Ki ein biltecha, nobody like you. Ein tzuk elokenu, and no rock like you. In other words, Hashem is our constant support and our guide. Al tarbu tadabru gavoha gavoha yetzi atat mipicha. Impossible to translate. Do not speak haughtily, she says. Do not let arrogance come out of your mouth. In other words, that you think you know better than God. Ki el deot Hashem, God is a God of knowledge. Lo nitkanu alilot, and to Him are deeds counted. Lo with an vav as opposed to an aleph. And basically, in other words, you think you can outsmart God, you cannot. All of this is praising of God. Keshet giborim chatim, the bow of the mighty is broken. Ba v'nichshalim ozru chayil. Those who stumbled are given strength. Again, the rabbis say maybe this is a reference to future events. As he says over here, he brings a whole a description over here of what exactly it's referring to. And I'm just making the point. This is not a tefillah. This is a praise. And she goes on. So I'm just another 1 minute. Seveim balechem niskaru reivim chadelu ada kara yolda shiva. She's saying that again, those sometimes are who are hungry. They have ceased. Again, she's talking about situations in life, and here she is having a dig, according to Rashi, direct. When she says somebody gave birth to 7 Rabat Banim Umnala, and the woman who had many children is very now very bereaved. And she's making a direct reference to Penina. And again, Chana is, with all due respect, you can say she may even be accused of gloating. And that is very difficult. This is Chana, who we are so enamored with. But it comes to a point, human nature takes over a little bit. And she sees her children are getting more and more. And Penina is losing more and more of her kids, according to the rabbinic interpretation. And the reality is that for Chana is a justification of her situation, but is putting down Penina. And again, this is very disturbing. This is not the tefillah of Tfilas Chana that we sort of get excited about. And then on top of that, she then praises God again. Hashem me'mitim chayem, a rich oviyah. God brings to life, and God brings out of the depths the person who may be downtrodden. Shem morishu mashir, God makes poor and rich. Mashpil af moreim, he lowers and raises up. So she's very full of praise of God. Make him ofadol, and these are psukim which we know because they eventually David HaMelech takes them over and uses them in Tehillim. She raises up from the dust, ma'ashpot yerim avyom, from the dung heap. She raises the person who is the pauper, as is translated. Lo shivim divim v'kisei kavod yanchileim. He'll be granted the throne of honor. Ki Hashem mitzuke erez, for God is the pillar of the world. V'yoshet aleim tevel, upon which the world rests. Raglei chasidav yishmahi God. So this is very full of praise of God. But at the same time, in terms of her personal comments here, Yeshma Lishol, there's something to wonder about. And I'm just going to finish 2 more verses. She talks about the wicked being cut off. A person is not just through his own strength, but obviously through the hand of God, Hashem will help you. And then finally, this is her tefillah. After 9 verses of praising God and of putting down the wicked and having a little bit of a dig at Penina, finally, Hashem yechatu merivav, may God, those who strive against God, the merivav, those who fight with God, may they be broken. Allah, alu bashamayim, or alavlet bashamayim yareim, and it says there will be upon him will God thunder. In other words, the enemy will be destroyed. Yadin afse aretz, he will judge the ends of the earth. This is a reference to Shmuel, who's going to go all around Eretz Yisrael judging. V'yitin oz l'malko, gives strength to the king, a prediction that Shmuel will eventually anoint the first king of Israel, so it's a bit of a nevuah. And vayorem keren mishicho, eventually the horn of salvation, matzmiach keren Yeshua, a reference to King David. So the anomaly, as I just wanted to point out, is that we call it Tfilas Chana, but the actual prayer is only literally the last verse. Everything else here is it's certainly in the style of King David, praising God, being close to Hashem, very Davidic, if you want to call it that, but with a few comments over here, particularly her comments towards Penina, not so easy to deal with. And, I leave you to look at that mitzvah maybe for next time. We may have a few more things to say about it next time, but I wanted to put it out that the tefillah is really only 1 verse, and the rest of it, praising Hashem on the plus side, but having these, sort of difficult comments on maybe not such plus side, let's put it that way. This evening, again, I hope that certainly food for thought, a little bit now, a bit more about Shmuel, about the family dynamic, Hannah being certainly very protective of Shmuel. And in this case, according to the Midrashic interpretation, praying for his life. The question of the Mishkan and what was going on in the Mishkan is very disturbing. And at the end, the Tfilas Chana, which is on the one hand the most beautiful poetry, with elements of prophecy, but with also elements, a bit like Devorah. When Devorah has it in for you, if you remember what Devorah said, her shira is praising God to the hilt, but if she doesn't like you because you didn't come to help her, God help you. She really lays it on the line, which I guess is, human nature to a certain extent. And again, I wanted to make that sort of a little bit aware. I'm very strong women. Oh my gosh! Wow.
No fury like a woman scorned.
Absolutely. I'm glad you said that. I'm glad I didn't have to say that. Otherwise, my wife would be throwing me out of the room. Gosh. Mitzvah Shem next time, 2 weeks time. Again, as I said, maybe we'll have a few more comments on that. But we're going to get to this very, very difficult story of the sons of Eli. What happened, as they say in good British novels, what happened in the end? We'll find out, Mitzvah Shem, 2 weeks time. Everybody, have a wonderful 2 weeks. Chodesh Adar, Shenichas Adar. Let's hope not just Marbim B'Simcha, meaning you've always got to be B'Simcha, a little bit extra. Not a little bit, a lot extra for Adar. So let's hope we'll have something to rejoice. And, good things will be coming. Please, God. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening.